Hey everyone. So we're here to talk about underserved populations and AI. And you just heard Sam Altman say that it is logical that you would take the riskiest populations to serve the riskiest use cases and deprioritize them, to handle those last. And I think that mindset totally makes a lot of sense, and I think is a good general framing in financial services, but I think it does have the potential to exacerbate one of the challenges that is already true in society in America now, and that is that low-income consumers are often the last to receive any positive benefit from a trickle-down basis of new technology. Right? That was true in the shift to the internet, it was true in the shift to cloud, it was true in the shift to mobile, and my assertion is that if we don't do anything about it, it'll be default true in this new AI-powered world that we're all going to live in soon. And that I would say furthermore, it is my belief that by default, just like the positive social benefits of AI will generally accrue to the wealthy, right? It's going to make the wealthy even more wealthy. And that will be in large part because I believe the creators of AI systems often lack the imagination to say, instead of just avoiding this population or these use cases altogether, how do we use the benefits of AI to, in a safe and positive way, actually help the needs of the underserved, of low-income Americans? I think about a future where there are AI software agents that are booking your Michelin-starred restaurants and helping you plan a vacation, but that people are still applying for food stamp benefits via paper forms in offices. That feels to me like a very plausible but sad kind of vision of the future. But honestly, there's no reason why that has to be the case, and I'm really fortunate to be joined today by two fantastic funders, Meredith Shields of Citi Impact Fund and Clarence Wardell of the Gates Foundation, who have funded a variety of organizations and who themselves have developed really strong perspectives on how AI can actually work in the best interest of underserved populations. So would love to ask you two to both introduce yourself. We'll start with Meredith. Introduce yourself and just tell me why that really pessimistic view of the future, where AI just exacerbates everything, might not necessarily be the case.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jimmy, for the kind introduction. I'm Meredith Shields. I lead Citi's Impact Fund. I'll quickly tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do, and then I'll give you your optimistic ideas. So Citi Impact Fund is a $500 million allocation off of Citi's balance sheet, so we're investing all of Citi's money. We're part of Citi's community investing and development strategy, and we're another tool in the toolkit alongside our foundation and traditional philanthropy. But we are investing 100% venture capital, and we do that because our goal is to help catalyze and support the growth of innovative solutions that we hope can power better, more efficient systems for underserved communities across the country. So a vision for the future. Being transparent, the venture capital industry has seen an explosion in AI activity this year. We, as impact investors who are focused on the needs of underserved communities, we haven't yet seen that explosion. Part of it has to do with the technology is still, as many here today have talked about, still developing, and we, and I believe others, are being cautious about how we proceed with serving underserved communities. That being said, we can imagine a world across the 4 verticals that we work: financial resilience, climate resilience, future of work, and social infrastructure, where we can embody, and I'm going to use this quote, and everyone can laugh because it's cheesy, but I think it's a great mental image. When Steve Jobs said that a computer is like a bicycle for the mind, that's how I think about what AI can be for augmenting the human experience, particularly for people who need that bicycle to run faster, to do more, to have more access. So I'll give you one quick example, and I'll pepper examples throughout this, but we invested in a company called Clerky a couple years ago. And Clerky was founded on the premise that when you go to pay your credit card bill, there's no can't pay button. There's the pay a certain amount or a minimum amount, or you just don't pay. So Clerky was born out of trying to solve that problem. What they're doing now is leveraging machine learning in the back end to understand a consumer's transaction history, cash flow dynamics, and then using a conversational AI bot on the front end to provide real, customized, personalized debt management advice that helps consumers to reduce their debt burden, helps financial institutions to reduce their defaults. And so solutions like that we're getting excited about because they serve to bring more better quality financial services to more people.
Great to be here with everyone. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Meredith. Clarence Wardell, Senior Program Officer at the Gates Foundation. I sit on our U.S. Economic Mobility team. It's a team, probably one of the newer ones within the foundation, still about 6 years old. We serve in our focus population. All of our investments across that team are focused on kind of our categorization, working age adults in the U.S., so ages 16 through 64, currently unenrolled in a post-secondary program, who live 200% or below the federal poverty level. So that's about 45 million folks in the U.S. that fit into that category, and about 93 million folks in the U.S. that live in a household with someone who fits that category. And so that's kind of the broad range of how we think about who our investments are intended to serve. I joined the team January 2023 to lead our innovation and R&D work. And so it just so happens, a month or two later, kind of the world goes crazy with some of the ChatGPT breakthroughs. And like everyone here, and the reason we're here today, within the foundation, it was an extreme paradigm shift. And you can imagine working at a foundation with Bill Gates, who I think part of that tipping point was for him. He was fairly skeptical until he saw some real, that the AI had passed some really challenging tests. And that for him, it kind of clicked in a moment, like, this is real. And we need to start figuring out kind of across the foundation how these tools are going to serve and benefit our focus population. So that fell kind of on me within our team to start to build out a strategy around that. We kind of quickly came to narrow, it's both narrow and broad, but we kind of quickly came to view, in particular, kind of the advice-giving navigational capabilities of AI to be potentially really powerful for our focus population. So when you think about, and we had done some work on this, and this is true for all of us, right? Like, we all have these moments in our lives where we're making really consequential decisions. We run into something where maybe we don't have, something doesn't go our way. We're let go from our job, and so we need to figure out, A, how do we get an unemployment insurance? And also, how do I start to think about the next steps for my career, right? And most of us, in this room, I'm assuming, that may not always be the case, usually have a cushion, have the network, the social capital to be able to weather those things in a way that folks in our focus population often don't, and are often facing those 5 or 6 of those that are compounded at any point in time, right? So lost job, maybe I'm a gig worker and just like the checks or the money that was made last month didn't come in at the same level this month. And so how are we navigating all of these difficult challenges, and how you make a decision at that point in time, or whether or not you're able to access resources, can be quite critical in terms of your future long-term economic outcomes. One example that always kind of stuck with me, there was a study in the city of Chicago where if you could give folks a housing voucher at the moment in which they were facing eviction to keep them in their house, the long-term outcomes for that person were much better than even if you got that check 2 or 3 days later. So they had been evicted and then you got them back in. So for us, it's like, how do you help and support folks kind of in those moments? And so we've been really excited, and I think, Jimmy, you touched on some of it, to begin to think about, how do you have something that kind of can help you in some of these crisis moments. And we've seen the analog, and, we historically, right, take away the technology. We just know that people thrive and are much better in terms of their outcomes when they have expert advice, when they have someone that cares about their situation and is able to kind of help them navigate through this process, right? So the social worker is the type of navigator. We think about somebody who's supporting individuals reentering after a period of incarceration, so parole and probation officers is a type of navigator. A big use case that we see is around legal aid services for all manner of issues that folks encounter. But what we also know is that those in our focus population, those types of navigator services are often inaccessible or highly, in high demand. And so you end up with cases where social workers managing 100 different folks kind of on their caseload over the course of a month. And you just start to understand that the quality doesn't, even if they want it to, right? They just don't have the time to offer kind of that quality assistance. So we see really big opportunities around, both supporting those folks who are the navigators to reduce, and I know we talked a lot about that, reduce a lot of just the administrative stuff, to just handle a lot of that so they can engage in kind of that higher order problem solving with you. But we're also really excited about what can these tools just kind of do on my behalf, right? If you know that, Clarence just lost his job, so he's going to need unemployment insurance, and we should also, I've been in conversation with Clarence for a while, and so I also know that, he's really interested in, in computers, and so maybe there's a training program that we can help him think about that we know has really good outcomes in terms of matching people with jobs, and so how do we get the suite of supports, and how do you have kind of wraparound around that? And so that's where we're kind of hedging, placing a lot of our bets. We'll talk a little bit about this, but we're excited we've been able to do an investment or a grant with Jimmy and his team, but really excited kind of across the spectrum is how do we start from the person and provide them with the supports that they need across that journey as they try to move up the economic mobility ladder.
Love that. The combination of those two visions, this idea of a bicycle for the mind and navigation in these crisis moments, is a really, I think, compelling vision of the future for how AI can make people better off. But my next question is, who's responsible for doing that, right? I think there's a traditionalist view that this is it's a public sector problem. It's the government, and taxpayers should fund the government, and that's the entirety of the problem. I mean, there was the example Clarence raised about the housing vouchers. That is a government program. But I wonder if you would assert that it's not purely the government, that there is a role for the private and for the nonprofit sector to play, and what that split might look like. So starting with Meredith on that one.
Sure. My short answer is all of us, all of us in this room and not in this room, from nonprofits and governments and regulators setting frameworks and helping to define safety and usability, to investors and corporations leaning in on innovation and thinking about new consumer behavior and the implications of AI tools and usability in the future, to consumers themselves providing feedback and elevating what they're seeing. As Sam and others highlighted, this, we don't have to talk about this anymore, we've mentioned it many times today, this is happening quickly, faster than any other technological convergence. And we have become quite interested in finding and supporting founders who acknowledge that if we don't jump in and find ways for the latest technology to serve those who are most underserved, then they will fall further behind, and the economic opportunity gap will only widen. And so we're hyper focused on ensuring that we're partnering and collaborating and investing across all of the stakeholders that you mentioned, so that we can imagine a better, more equitable future leveraging this technology.
Thank you.
Similar, all of the above, everyone. We have investments and partnerships kind of across the board. Had the opportunity to serve in the first 2 years of the Biden-Harris administration. One of our big focus areas, and folks may not be familiar with this, but we issued a customer experience executive order. And kind of within that was a charge to the federal government to prioritize life experiences, kind of priority life experiences for folks in the U.S., to be able to access kind of basic government services in their moment of need and as simply as easily as possible. One of those areas that we focused on was someone facing financial shocks, right? And so it's how do you, from the federal government side, working with states and localities, make it easier, reduce forms, streamline data on the back end to better serve people and get them enrolled in the full set of suites of programs that they're eligible for. So that's great, and that's really important, and the more government does on that side to simplify and streamline, the easier it is for Jimmy and his team to work with government services, and the easier it is for the local community-based organizations and nonprofits to work with government services as well. So that's one piece. But even if you held static, the government services are what they are and are going to be what they are, you know that there's still lots of room for innovation. And so one of the areas, we were just talking about, even if you left that still or static, there's quite, we're just really excited about the opportunity for these agents and agentic capabilities to be able to help you kind of quickly, so you got the 200-page form. Well, now we can help you, we can pull it in our system, just help you voice, your scenario to that form, fill it out for you, pull in some of the other information, and maybe submit it on your behalf. Now, there's a lot that needs to happen to to allow for that, kind of end-to-end to happen, but you can have that type of innovation in the private sector. And so I think that's where it's really critical on the private sector side. And then the other place that we are really, we think is really critical for all this is strong relationships as close to the ground as possible, particularly with those folks who are working with individuals in our focus population. And so we've made a set of investments with organizations like the National Domestic Workers Alliance. There's an organization that I'm really excited about, brand new, called Frontline Justice. And actually what they're trying to do is to go right at this challenge of access to legal services and opening up kind of this idea of kind of informal legal services advisors. And you need certain regulations, but there's states moving in that direction that allow someone at a community-based organization that doesn't have a law degree to start to provide you with advice around certain kind of low-level legal questions that they couldn't necessarily do before. And so we were able to fund them early on. We said, this is great. They were thinking about a lot of trainings. By necessity, you all should be thinking from the jump around how you're going to leverage these technologies to support folks either directly or to support those informal advisors to pull up the right information, answer your questions. And so you can kind of quickly scale at levels that wouldn't be possible kind of in a pre-Gen AI era. And so the other thing that they have that I think is a little bit harder from the private sector and the government side is trust, right? Because they've been in the lives of these folks trying to help them over time. And it's not just, hey, we're trying here to make a dollar. We're invested in you. And so we think, kind of a big piece of all of this that has been a theme throughout the day is like trust building, trust in the capabilities of these tools, trust in the people who are telling you these things are actually going to provide you with the right advice. And so we think that all three of these, pieces are quite critical to the puzzle.
And that point of trust, Meredith, I'm curious for your take on it, because I know it's something that you feel strongly about. What is trust in this context? What are examples of it? Like, everyone aspires to build trust, but like, how do you go right in doing that?
So I don't have a complete answer on how we'll build trust, particularly in financial services and AI, but I can give a couple of thoughts. And I'm going to start by giving an example of a really cool demo that I got to see about a month ago. There are several companies that are trying to figure out how to enable consumers to better navigate some of the more curated, personalized aspects of personal finance. So whether that's negotiating fees down or negotiating a better rate, this takes time. Sometimes it takes somebody telling you it's possible. So the demo that I listened to was a service that had analyzed a whole bunch of transaction data and could take somebody's personal history and say, hey, you are paying too much here, you're paying too much here, and by the way, we can clone your voice using Gen AI and call and talk to a customer service representative and negotiate on your behalf using your data. And so here in this piloted live, and the bot was very successful, like 50% reduction in this person's fees in like a 3-minute call. And the bot was not didn't feel socially awkward to keep asking and keep asking and keep asking. And it also had the benefit of having done this a lot and knew that after the 5th time or after this offer came that offer, they knew the playbook of how the customer service representative was going to operate. So back to trust, that's exciting. That's something that can help power a lot of themes that we've heard today. So whether there are barriers to language, barriers to access, barriers to knowledge, but that also is kind of terrifying. And this particular company noted that in early customer studies that they'd done, unanimous, nobody wants to do this. Nobody would hit opt-in because it's scary. And so I think that particularly as we think about the needs of underserved communities, we are establishing trust through many of the major systems that power our economy, including, of course, the financial services industry. But we're definitely in the business of establishing trust if we are asking people to trust the financial services industry and a robot that's assisting along the way. So I agree with everything you both said. The trust component is going to be paramount.
Jimmy, can I take moderator's prerogative for a second?
Go for
And I kind of want to turn it on to you and ask, as someone who is, has a company, has trusted relationships with your users and the folks who use your product, how are you all thinking about these tools, and what have you seen in terms of trust or interest from those you work with?
Yeah, thanks, Clarence. So briefly, we at Propel build an app that is used by over 5 million Americans to make the safety net more user-friendly. We started off with SNAP benefits and have automated and streamlined a variety of experiences around receiving SNAP, more commonly known as food stamps in the United States, but in recent years have also expanded into a variety of other programs, some on EBT cards, but also including things like tax filing and receiving disability payments and managing healthcare like Medicaid and Medicare and so on. And we have thought a lot about this topic of trust, especially as it relates to our opportunity with AI. The mission of the company is around making the safety net more user-friendly. And I think there's this incredible promise for large language models and generative AI to do exactly that. Because when you're navigating the safety net, there often is a right answer, or at least a right answer for you in that moment of how do I recertify my benefits, or how do I apply for thing XYZ, or do I qualify or not for thing ABC? It just requires oftentimes thousands of pages of state, federal, and local regulations mashed up with caseworker manuals and mashed up with this know-how, per Meredith's example of like, you gotta kind of know how the phone tree works and like how hard to push on who to get the right answer, that kind of knowledge right now is the best practice for how you navigate many key safety net programs. But if we could codify and scale that, that is, in our view, one of the more exciting ways that we can improve navigation of the safety net and just be a giant step forward in how effective America's social safety net is. And so we've been really pleased to partner with Clarence and his organization to pilot this kind of concept of policy documents into a system that is really tailor-made for the needs of navigating social safety net programs. And it's been, I think, possible for us because our approach for the last 10 years really has been about consumer trust. It's been about how do we do right by consumers day in and day out so that they are willing to trust us with a little bit of things that are sensitive in their lives, whether it's their banking or their key decisions around healthcare or employment and so on. So that's kind of been our journey. I'd say we're at the beginning of it. And I think that our journey in this case is maybe not so unique in terms of being a company that has wanted to serve low-income Americans as well as we possibly could and trying to see, is generative AI an opportunity to really turbocharge that? I'd love to hear about companies or nonprofit organizations that either of you have invested in, partnered with, that have done similar things, tried to make that leap, like what's working and what's not working.
I love how you approach, I love how Propel approaches trust with consumers. Kind of circling around the last topic, there are a number of ways to approach trust. So you can have a strong, credible brand, you can have consistent positive experiences, you can have validators around you. One thing that we've seen that's worked well is we invested in a company called Wealthy, and this is a company that is trying to solve the problem of adult caregivers who are working or trying to work full-time or even part-time, but caregiving for a family member. And so a classic example of one of their customers is somebody who is caring for their children, and then a parent has a debilitating health incident, and now they're trying to navigate social services, legal services, the bank, to figure out how to best care for their parent. So Wealthy provides almost like a concierge. So they have a team of former social services and social workers who advise and guide people through each step of the system. They're now leveraging AI in order to enhance both their own productivity, but also the recommendations they can give. So, for example, if I'm a Wealthy employee who's supporting people here in DC, I have colleagues in Asheville, North Carolina, and New York City, and Raleigh, North Carolina, and other states. When I encounter something I've never seen before, I'm going to have to spend a lot of time to research and find the answer. But maybe my colleagues in North Carolina or another state have seen that multiple times before. The AI on the back end of Wealthy service knows how to bring all of that together so that I can quickly query and find the answer based on the learnings of my colleagues in other places who I've never met. At the same time, they're pulling together all of those learnings, all of those recommendations, the things that the model is seeing across their customer base, and delivering better and more sophisticated recommendations to people who are trying to make decisions about how to best care for a loved one. But an important part is that it's not just AI, it's a human involved as well. And so the AI is augmenting the human experience and the human delivery, and the human is not just supervising, the human is using it hand in hand. And that's been one way that they've been able to use the technology and also inspire and deliver trust.
Question on like investments. I guess one thing I want to say is it still feels, you know, and Sam actually made this point earlier, like this stuff feels like it's moving so fast and the technology is moving so fast on one hand. But I do think, and this is probably a good thing, I think on kind of the other side, and you all can talk to this, and a lot of the investments we've made, you know, folks are still kind of feeling their way around this, and I think part of it is this like, maybe a little bit of lessons learned from like, you know, the early 2000s, the move fast and break things era. And it's like folks have, so I've seen less of like kind of from the ground new startups that are working in this space. It's more, you know, folks like you all, we've made investment in a nonprofit folks may be familiar with called Upsolve that help individuals navigate bankruptcy, and they're starting to think about kind of a broad array of services and providing more tailored and personalized advice. We made an investment or a grant in an organization called Recidivists that is trying to improve the types of supports the folks have when they're reentering after a period of incarceration. So both working with parole officers, but trying to move kind of tailored information directly down to the individual so that they can have a good sense of their path and journey. And so in all of these cases, you know, you all are kind of these incumbent organizations, may not be huge, but like have been around, have built trust because you work in sensitive spaces with a vulnerable population. And so we've seen, I think that's been kind of the best, at least at the moment, to start to understand what are some of the challenges that come up within this. And so I still think that we have so much more. You know, I struggle a little bit with like, I'm a little cautious to call something a success right now. I think, you know, too often like folks will roll something out and it does a thing, and we don't really know if it actually like provides the benefit or like what the outcomes are long term. And so we're really trying to build is like, you know, for some of this stuff, what does success even mean? You know, for ChatGPT, like we felt good because it could pass the AP biology exam, right? Or it can, you know, we have a certain set of benchmarks that aren't necessarily benchmarks or evaluation frameworks for our focus population. And so one of the areas that we're excited to be investing in as well is what are some of those benchmarks? How do you know that folks are getting the right information when they're asking about benefits or all manner of other things? And so, I don't know, I'm excited, and I think, you know, this piece of, you know, learning, you know, to your point, with the users, with the folks who are going through this and figuring out what actually matters to them has shown positive results so far. I think we need to do more of that. We need to do, you know, some of it a little bit quicker too.
Yeah. I'd like to shift to talk specifically about the government. And most of our panels to date have talked about the government as a regulator, which makes sense. We're at a FinReg Lab event after all. But there's another key role of the government that we haven't talked about as much, which is government as a service provider. That there are a number of services that the government provides at the state and federal and local levels, whether that's renewing your passport or getting a small business license or applying for SNAP benefits. These are all things that often trillions of dollars are kind of moving towards, that the government is building websites or creating user experiences that consumers have to go navigate. We at Propel come in with a pretty strong view that there's a big opportunity for the government to enable software agents to intermediate these government experiences. And that at the moment there's a range of kind of regulatory stances towards software agents that have consumer permission acting on people's behalf to help them navigate these government programs. But I think the broader question is, how do we make sure that the government doesn't get left behind? That we don't end up in a future that I described earlier where everything in the private sector is fully automated and easy to use because of AI, but that these public sector services that often are disproportionately the key lifelines for low-income and underserved populations are still sort of stuck in the Web 1.0 age. What has to happen?
I mean, an easy one to name. It's not necessarily easy in practice, but I've lived it. I think talent is a big piece, and it's getting the right folks. And I think, you know, I forget his name, CEO of a firm, was talking earlier around, Max was talking about, you know, in his case, right, it was, I think working with CFPB, right, and like, do we have the folks with the requisite kind of background, knowledge, understanding to both sure regulate, but also to be able to understand kind of what's too far or what's not enough, and to create that space for companies. And I think it's the same, certainly the same thing when we're talking about as a service, right? I think, on the federal side, I served in the Obama administration during the creation of the U.S. Digital Service, all of this after the collapse of health, or the inability of healthcare.gov to get off the ground, right? It was a recognition that, like, to your point, this is like the signature piece of legislation that was a government service that was being provided through healthcare.gov, and folks couldn't access it, right? And so it was a big effusion of talent on the federal side. I think there's been a lot of efforts on the state and local side over the years, but I think we just need more of that. It's never enough, and I think both, not just in the delivery side piece, but something we tried to do kind of this go around, is on the policy side as well. I think oftentimes the policy and the technical talent aren't necessarily talking to one another, and so you have kind of policy guardrails and things being designed or passed in a ways that is in some ways directly conflicting with our ability to actually deliver a service, or to your point, Jimmy, like enable outside private sector nonprofits to interact with those services, and really think of like government as a platform to create and spur innovation and to enhance the delivery of services. And so for me, the talent is the big piece, kind of technical talent, and kind of in all parts of the room.
Thanks. Any thoughts, Meredith?
I would just add, we can't get off this stage before we talk about safety and security, and that ties back into trust. And so we can talk about that in the government sense, that I think the government can be a stamp of credibility for trust. We talked about it a lot today. The models are built on static and historical information and data, and if we don't want to repeat the same mistakes of the past, then we need to intentionally interject additional information into the models to ensure that the future looks differently. I think that the government is in a great position to be able to be working on and advocating for, and then providing credible examples of how to do that.
Great. All right, 1 minute left, lightning round. What is something that you would jump out of your chair to fund? Something that you wish someone would come pitch you?
So for me, it's kind of an all-encompassing, we talked about it internally as like a digital social worker, but like someone who's working on, we're here on thinking about the financial sector. We got a bunch of folks that are like kind of in legal tech. We got a bunch of folks that focus on housing. But individuals experience all of those. And I think somebody who's starting from that premise of like, how do I help you navigate these critical challenges in a way with the tools and capabilities that we now have available in front of us? That would be really exciting to me. I haven't really seen that yet. It's a hard problem, but if you guys know of anyone, tell them to come my way. Yeah.
Love it. And I want to see a really personalized, customized, easy to access personal finance tool that has a "Can I afford this" button that leverages consumer data, market data, regional data to help people make those decisions in daily life.
Love it. All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much, everyone.